Welcome to Therapy for Nerds, the show where licensed mental health professionals use their favorite topics like TV, books, games, and movies to provide psychoeducation on mental health. Please note, this is not meant to be a replacement for mental health treatment or services. Hi, guys, and welcome to Therapy for Nerds. I am Cassidy Russell, along with
Abbey, and how are you all today?
good, I hope, and hopefully not getting rained on too hard.
Oh yeah, LA's been a river, truly.
Yeah, especially because we have zero drainage. And then all of our drainage gets like clogged. It's a mess. LA is a mess in the rain, and no one in LA knows how to handle themselves in the rain.
But yeah, here we are again.
Here we are again. And this week, Abby, have you ever played a game to get away from your real world problems?
If you're talking about the whole 2 years of the pandemic, yes. Um, Besides that, yes, of course. Like I think that and not just virtual reality, right? Like other forms of video games as well,
Hmm.
and other types of games, even board games, are great ways to kind of
Hmm.
indulge yourself in a different world or a different reality, or just to kind of focus on
Hmm.
something that isn't as scary and overwhelming as real life.
Hmm. Yep. Video games fill a need, and that is exactly what happened to both characters, Retsuko and Haida, in the show Aggretsuko, a show that I love and have watched rewatched multiple times, except for the latest season, because that just hasn't been out enough for me to rewatch too many times quite yet. But I'll get there.
I'm sure, yeah. Yeah, escapism through like forms of media, including mostly like specifically video games, I think is something that's very natural for people to do. I think like it's intentional. A lot of video games are
Mhm.
made for you to be able to be sucked into that world.
Mhm.
A lot of video games have their own planets, have their own languages, have their own
Mhm.
creatures and people that, or not people, but persons. I don't know what to call them, but like beings um, attached to
Mhm.
them. So I think that that's part of it. Like I think that that's part of
Mhm.
what video games are made to do. Now, is it
Mhm.
healthy or not? That's a different question.
Yeah, I feel like Aggretsuko kind of asked the question like, what is that line? Because I think video games can be a coping skill. Um, and I feel like they can be an adaptive coping skill that can easily turn into a maladaptive coping skill, depending on the situation, depending on the time, right? Like if Haida was playing video games on the weekend when he didn't have any dates or anything planned with Retsuko, that's fine. Like unwinding from work, that's a great way to relax from time to time. Like that's perfectly normal playing. When you're constantly playing it to the point of also buying all of this extra stuff and spending money you don't have, to the point where you then become homeless because you don't have a job and you don't have any kind of income and you're just spending it on the video game, that's a problem, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to back up a little bit because I don't know if like everyone in the audience knows about adaptive versus maladaptive. So maybe it's good to kind of like clarify what that is too.
Yeah, I caught myself because I was about to say healthy versus unhealthy or like positive versus negative. I've used those terms before too, but like I don't know if they're like quite encapsulates what I want to say about coping skills because I don't feel like everything is positive versus negative or healthy versus unhealthy. I feel like it's the way that you use it. And so adaptive to me means way like a coping skill that you're able to utilize well,
Yeah,
versus maladaptive, which is a coping skill that ends up hurting you in the end in some way.
right. No, I completely agree, and I think that adaptive and maladaptive is probably closer to the language that really describes some of these coping mechanisms because in a lot of ways it's kind of like it's like a wave. It's not really necessarily one or the other. It just depends on when you're using it and utilizing it.
Mhm.
I think I get this question from clients a lot in regards to like coping mechanisms when we talk about intentional diversion or intentional like distraction. They're like, well,
Mhm.
aren't I just like not engaging or like not acknowledging that there's a problem, which is
Mhm.
somewhat true. But
Mhm.
also part of it is also acknowledging how much of it you can handle at a time and being intentional about
Mhm.
the things that you do to be able to soothe yourself and keep you level to the point where you can
Mhm.
start thinking or approaching whatever the
Mhm.
thing is in a more healthy way. So I think that maybe, and I don't know, you know the series a lot better than I do. I think like with the character Haida, I don't know necessarily if maybe it started that way. I wonder if like when he started getting into video games and he has some friends online or had made some good connections there, that it was very adaptive. It was something to stimulate his brain when he wasn't working and kind of also make connections because he wasn't going outside. So I can see that there are probably a lot of the features about at the beginning for this character, anyways, of video games or playing these games online.
Yeah, definitely. And the word that my clients often use when we're talking about coping skills is like distractions. Aren't I just distracting myself? And yeah, it's definitely we don't see Haida play video games really before this point in the series. He's not his like personal life isn't really the focus of the series until that point though. Because most of it is just like him watching Retsuko from afar and like really wanting to be in a relationship. And then finally, they're in at the beginning of season 5, they're a couple. But Haida is going through this difficult time where he's he thought he was doing really well at his job, but then it ended up taking a turn for the worst. He ended up having to resign, and then he didn't immediately go back to finding a job. And there was a lot of like there's some depression elements in there, I feel, where the thought after having that horrible experience, just not having the energy to go back right away.
Right.
And if he had more time to like around, then maybe that would have worked out well. Um, I feel like his in later on in the season, he starts turning his life around. Well, Retsuko helps him by letting him live with her, and then he decides to start working to get involved as like a programmer because he's shown some skills with computers and programming, and so that's something that he can definitely do, and I feel like that's a great way for his character to go because yeah, reach your dreams. You don't have to be an accountant.
Yeah. No, I think that's so important too. And I think like a big draw of Aggretsuko and like the whole series is this idea of like she's somebody who's in that culture, like the work culture, or like the sometimes toxic work culture or like corporate life. And it's very relatable to a lot of people who feel very similar. They're trapped in their work. And it's interesting because the name of the episode, the first episode of season 5, is called "A Prison Called Freedom." And I presume, right, like the freedom that they're talking about is that Haida is no longer employed. He's free from this
Mhm.
toxic workplace, stuck in that mundane 9 to 5 every time thing, but it's still a prison because you are really never free from this feeling that you're feeling inside if you're not able to acknowledge whatever that thing is. So it does like in that episode we also see some of the family patterns or like the family dysfunction that's going on and the relationships there as well as the romantic relationship that he has with Retsuko. So I think that maybe a lot of what he thought that like after getting fired, maybe he felt like empowered, like okay, I'm gonna be a different person now, or I'm gonna have like a different life, and it didn't end up being that way because maybe the problem wasn't like fully the job. There were other things that he wasn't addressing, and he was just burying his head into the work and
Mhm.
avoiding all these other things. So when we talk about like we were just talking about right like
Mhm.
trying to distract yourself in good things, or like maladaptive versus adaptive. Maybe it wasn't very adaptive for him to bury himself in his work.
I wonder if part of it too was just like so much of his character up to that point was wanting to be in a relationship with Retsuko, and like that was a big reason to just go into work was to see his crush. So like then you're in a relationship and it's like, well, I don't have to go into work to see her. Like I can see her at dinner or something. Like you don't that motivation is also gone.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. I can't speak too much about it, but I do know that like in other in all parts of life, like sometimes we go into something with an expectation and then it turns out not to be what we thought it was going to be. And then your motivation for whatever thing starts to drop or starts to,
Mhm.
widen into other areas of your life because it just is ends up being what you wanted it to be.
Yeah, like the best part about any job is when you first get the acceptance, pretty much.
Yeah, a job is still a job, I guess, even if it's something you enjoy. And yeah, so going back to this whole idea of like um the escapism or like being able to play video games. A lot of times video games are pretty consistent. I don't want to say it's like you know what to expect because of course there are a lot of twists and turns when it comes to games. But when you set the scene up for yourself, you boot it up, you have the same screen, you start where your save file is, you know exactly what to expect. The anticipation is there. Um, you know that your character is going to look exactly the same way that you left it. Nothing changes dramatically. Sometimes that can be very comforting and soothing for somebody who's just not used to having a lot of control over the things that are happening around them.
Yeah, and like they even point this out in the show because in the next episode, Finico and I forget what the dear character's name is, but she has like a breakdown of the two ways the unemployed boyfriend can go. Either he becomes a gym rat and like looks great, like it starts looking amazing because he's all buff, or he could go the video game route and all the accomplishments like make him feel like a hero, but and so he makes the hero face, but all he did was click a button. Like she comments
Yeah,
that. So and like I get that because there's the video game is fulfilling a psychological need. The need is to feel accomplished. And video games notoriously have these goals that you can accomplish. Like you have a small goal, you beat it, and then like the goals start getting harder and harder and harder and just a little bit farther. And then a lot of games will make use of like the sunk cost fallacy where you feel like, oh, well, I already put in this amount of work. So I need to continue. Otherwise, that work is lost.
yeah, absolutely. Mm. I think we could do a full episode about like sunken cost fallacy because that comes up a lot for people, I think. Um, but it's
Hmm.
interesting that you mentioned that because at the beginning of this episode, during the credit scenes, like you see him in like armor and stuff. So it kind of is
Hmm.
like hinting to the idea of what's gonna happen in regards to like video games or him
Hmm.
engaging in something that makes him feel heroic.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly what it is too, is sometimes especially when it comes to work or I'll talk about traditional like sex roles of sexes, right? Like
Hmm.
a person can feel very emasculated when they are not when they're fired or like let go of a job or like told that
Hmm.
they're not good enough. And for him, maybe I'm just making an assumption, maybe that the video game was very empowering because he got to level up and be this very strong character, which didn't match what was happening in real life.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because like in real life, he wasn't doing like the thing that he wanted to do ended up not working out.
Mhm.
And so in the video game, he gets to feel like this big, powerful hero. Obviously, to get to the point where he has that nice armor, he's already put a lot into the game. And the more he puts into the game, the more valuable the game is, right? Like, that's why people that have these characters that they've had for a long time don't want to get rid of whatever it is. like say someone's been paying for WoW for
Mhm.
however long it's been out now, and they have all these rare items and weapons, and like some they might not feel like canceling that subscription even if they haven't played in 2 years because like they already have they already put in so much and they don't want to lose that.
Yeah. The sense of accomplishment I think is so important here, and I think that
Mhm.
being able to visualize or see something that you worked so hard for is important.
Mhm.
And sometimes I think when it comes to therapy, right, or like mental health, a lot of times I've noticed with some of my clients that they have a hard time acknowledging their growth and progress in therapy because they tend not to have something tangible to attach to it. um
Mm.
they may notice like, and sometimes they don't even notice that they're not no longer anxious about something, or they're not thinking these thoughts anymore because there's nothing there to hold on to. And I think that for this character was really important for them to see that. And they had a friend like trying to get them to purchase more weapons or like buy other things, and like I think that was like kind of very empowering for him to say like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna add more value to myself. Like his character was himself, right? Like so adding more value to myself and proving to all the people, not only in the game, but maybe in
Mhm.
his real life that, hey, I'm not just
Mhm.
a nothing. Like I am something.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that's where I feel like people get the idea of video game addiction from, because I feel like I can understand why people would think that that feeling is addicting. And I feel like it gets very close to probably what gambling addiction is. I'm not an expert on gambling addiction. Uh, I just know I'm hesitant towards a video game as a addiction as a diagnosis. Anytime you get into behavioral addictions as a diagnosis, there's a lot of controversy surrounding them. Yeah. It just because it's a coping skill that's fulfilling a need. But
Mhm.
if you're able to switch it out with another coping skill, then that video game addiction isn't there anymore. Like once you find the soul root, the once you find the causes and you address the causes of the addiction behavior, then that behavior tends to dissipate. Like if um the video game playing is out of a sense of out of a need for accomplishments or out of a need of needing to feel fulfilled, then once Haida's able to get this new position and feels fulfilled in his new career, I wouldn't be surprised if the video game playing dies out or at least goes back to a more minimal style of playing.
Yeah, there is something there that needs to be fulfilled. When we talk about addiction, right? Like addiction as a disease, oftentimes you'll see people like who are in recovery working on alcoholism or other substances replace the substance or the addiction with a different type of addiction, right?
Mhm.
A more healthy coping mechanism, something that's not going to harm their bodies, like painting or candy. Candy's a big one, sour candy, for people who are in recovery.
I heard
So
exercise is a big one.
yeah, exercise as well. So I think that you're right. Like we'll probably, and I haven't watched the rest of the season, but we'll probably see the development of this character kind of go in a way of avoid, after coming to reality and seeing like getting kicked. I guess it was a spoiler that they were kicked out of their home, and that his girlfriend wanted to leave him for this reason or gave him an ultimatum. I think that really kind of put into perspective for him, like, okay, well, what is really important to me, that I perceive myself this way, or that the people around me are going to perceive me in the way that I want to be perceived. So I'm really hoping that later in the season, this character gets a chance to redeem themselves and pulls away from this now maladaptive coping mechanism and starts to engage themselves in things that are more health, healthy and more in the same way fulfilling that the video games were for him.
In that vein, how do you think Retsuko would be best suited to support Haida?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know either. I don't know either character well enough, but I do acknowledge that this character was trying to put a boundary around the relationship. and said,
Mhm.
hey, like I can only take so much of this, and either you're able to work towards supporting our relationship and supporting me by getting rid of this thing, or then I'm going to leave. Um, and when we talk about addiction, I don't want to get too crazy into the addiction, but I know when we talk about addiction, a big thing is like, are you enabling the person to do the behaviors? So I think that maybe that was her way of trying to support him
Mhm.
by giving him this like ultimatum for him to kind of decide and acknowledge like what was really important in his life. um, I think another way to support him probably would be to ask, right? Like, well, what? Tell me what the video game did to you, so I can understand, or what was it
Mhm.
about this that was so important or so helpful? And can
Mhm.
we find that somewhere else? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that that is one of the most powerful interventions I think anyone can do when they're dealing with someone who they feel has problematic gaming, is to either talk about the game with them or literally play the game with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you play a video game with someone, like you will learn so much about why it is that they're playing it. And like it gets you to understand the game so you can like talk to them about it. And
Yeah.
it gets them to feel like you're attempting to make that connection. And that bond can be really powerful. So especially if like it's a parent that doesn't understand a child's gaming, and that is my cat's tail because he's deciding to check in. It can be like that's one of the most powerful things you can do with your kids is just play video games with them, do what they enjoy.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think like in so many ways the Retsuko character could relate because they have their own right like kind of addiction in the other season in regards to video games too or games. And
Mhm.
I know there was that scene where like she even defends him and kind of says like yeah like like I get it. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, I think that maybe that would be a good intervention. Like if they were in couples counseling or something, a good intervention would be to do it together. And try
Yeah.
to identify it and understand each other on that level. Um, I think we've mentioned that before for parents. I think that it's really important that you engage in the things that your loved ones
Mhm.
are interested in because it's important to them and they're important to you. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's I mean, it's something that I've like looked something that I've seen just time and time again when I'm looking at video game research or just parenting advice in general. It's like at least feign interest in what your child's interested in. And you'd be surprised just how much more like of a give and take you'll have with your relationship with your kids if you just give that little bit more to understand what it is that they're talking about, what it is that they're doing, what it is that they love.
Exactly.
But all right, guys, have you dealt with anyone with problematic video gaming? Is there a game that you use to cope with stuff? I know I've used Breath of the Wild and Stardew Valley. I don't even know how many hours I have logged in Stardew Valley. A lot. It is a lot. And Animal Crossing. Oh God.
Yeah. I would also be curious to know if anyone, through understanding somebody that you love or kind of getting involved in their hobby, like what have you enjoyed or like started to pick up as
Mm.
well? Because I think that's a great way to learn hobbies, like get other hobbies is by learning from other people too.
Yeah, definitely. All right, guys, let us know. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you liked this episode, please comment, like, subscribe, and follow us on social media. Remember to be kind to yourselves this week.